Hi there, my name is Hannah Yore, and I am here today as part of our work at SAGE to collect stories from LGBTIQ older adults all over the world. I'm the Director of International Programs, and I'm going to invite Kevin, who I'm so honored to be here with today, to introduce himself, and we'll get started.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Kevin Mwachiro. I'm a Kenyan. I'm a writer, I'm a podcaster, I'm a queer activist, and a journalist. I'm a lover of words. I'm a storyteller, and now getting used to the fact that I'm an older queer person.
Yes, yes. Tell me, Kevin, a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, what your family was like.
Okay, I grew up here in the capital, Kenya. Come from a fairly middle class home. Um, I have three brothers. My youngest brother is my half brother. We were really lucky. My parents were um, baby boomers who really did well for themselves for that time, because at that time, Kenya was still a very young, independent African country. There was a lot more opportunities for Black folk. The world was opening up, the country was opening up, and we were able to get the benefits of that. My grandparents were educationalists, were key, really big on education. So my parents were deliberate in making sure that we got really good education. Went to private schools right through. Um, and we're just really lucky that we were exposed to a world outside of Kenya from a very young age. As a child, yeah, I tell people I maybe had the best of both. I liked playing I had a very strong effeminate side, but also a pretty strong masculine side. And I'd be playing rugby at one time. I come from a rugby playing family. And then I'd be, looking at dolls and really hoping that I could get up one for myself. So just basic, I think I had a fairly normal childhood. My parents separated really early, which I would say was which was traumatic for me, because at that time, this was in the early 80s, that didn't happen. But it also happened at a time where I was on a journey of, I just started noticing things that were different around myself. So it was dealing with becoming a teenager, being prepubescent, and also coming from a broken home,
Yeah,
if I can say that, and
yeah.
people treating you different because that wasn't the norm. Yeah, I think I had a fairly normal childhood with all the slight drama that came with it, but I'm just grateful for the things that were given to us and were poured into us by my parents.
Yeah. And so when and how did you first realize you were queer? Can you share a little bit about what your coming out process was like?
It took a while, to be honest,
Yeah.
from early realization that my feelings were different. I was in we say primary school, excuse me, elementary school, to going into teenagehood and being in high school. That was when I started noticing things were differently. I wasn't as excited about seeing girls as my friends were. They were losing their virginity really early, and I'm like, it's gonna be harder for me. Excuse me.
We're both coughing. It's okay. It's a season. Bless you.
Excuse me. Thank you. It was hard. I remember being around 15, 16, and I'm like, oh, I'm feeling things in my body, and I just don't want to be with women. I feel myself more attracted to guys. So what would happen is on Sundays, I'd ask my dad for money to go into the city center to go to church. And I'd go to church for like a few minutes, and then I'd just walk down into the capital city, Nairobi, into the central business district, as we call it. And I just find myself walking on the streets of Nairobi, hoping that I would meet someone who would understand what I was going through, or hoping to meet someone who would want to sleep with me, and I would want to sleep with them. I didn't know the rules, I didn't know the language, but it was like that for a number of Sundays, a number of Saturdays. And you sort of start seeing things differently. Why does that guy look like this? Why is that person dressed like that? And at that point in time, you sort of think sexuality is a very white thing, so you're only looking at white people. And I think it's also an element of safety where you figure the farther I can keep this away from things that are familiar to me, the better.
Hmm.
And I was pretty brazen back then. I remember my first successful encounter was with a Dutch gentleman who was passing through the country, and I approached him, and we ended up hooking up. Went to his hotel, and for me, that was, I remember being in that moment and like this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted. I had to lie and make up a story about my background just to make sure my bases were covered. But it was that. But immediately after that, there was a huge feeling of guilt immediately, and I sort of buried those feelings, even though it was a struggle until my late 20s. But it was, yeah, it was kind of tough. And it was only later on in my late 20s that I slowly, I went into the church, immersed myself in the church for a while. Um, Used to read books on conversion therapy. There was a bookshop, a Christian bookshop in downtown Nairobi. I knew I'd go there and somehow you'd find books written by ex-gay authors who were telling you their journey. And you sort of want to fix that. I was praying and fasting, and trying to do all the right things to deny who I am, asking God for a miracle. So there's a lot of that, wondering and wondering. There's a lot of self-hate, sadly, a lot of self-hate, low self-esteem. That did happen. Didn't care for myself, didn't see any value in myself because I didn't think I was really good enough, you know. And there was no one to affirm you. You see someone and like, this is wrong, this is the devil,
Yeah.
and you suppress that. So I would say my early adulthood was person I am, and I look at that, but I sort of feel sorry for myself, to be honest. I just wish there was someone to affirm me and saying you're good,
Yeah.
only to discover that later on in life that I am good. And you sort of like when all these feelings eventually start bubbling up and you're meeting adults now, the internet was showing up. So I was secretly looking at porn at work, and then you're like, yeah, and you're seeing guys make out. You're like, oh wow, one day, and then you bust a nut and then go and confess and go and repent and that kind of thing. And then you're doing it, you're back there the following day. So it was hard, to be honest. It wasn't pleasant. It was living a double life wasn't a great existence until I got caught
Mm.
um kissing a guy, and that sort of like forced me to say, but I enjoyed that. I'm not quite sure about where I'm at with this now, but this is who I am. I
Hmm.
like guys. I'm much rather kiss a guy than a girl.
Hmm.
And I got support from a pastor. I told them, but it was that whole thing. I will try and be a good Christian, but also recognizing that I like guys. And I didn't, and I was in that state for a while until a point I just figured I'm just going to live the double life, Christian by day, homosexual by night, until it get to a point that I realized this is just too difficult. Choose one. And I chose me.
Hmm. Hmm. Have you been able to, in the years since, integrate your faith with your sexuality? Do you do identify as a Christian today, or is that something that feels very much part of your past?
It feels very much part of my past, to be honest. But I'm rediscovering spirituality.
Mhm.
Rediscovering, I think the Bible's a good book for like broad knowledge and
Sure.
wisdom. I think for me,
Yeah.
that's how it is. I'm even beginning to identify. I would never tell people I used to be a Christian before. I was a little bit embarrassed about that,
Mm.
but also realized in also owning up and acknowledging that journey, that part of my life. I've found other Christian men who are in the closet come up to me and they're like, we didn't think there'd be anyone who'd be able to talk so openly about both aspects of their lives.
Right.
Um, I'm a lot more spiritual now, a lot more, and I like the fact that I'm in this space that recognizes other beings, ancestors, deities that are other than me, and I think faith is more important than religion and dogma. I went to a Christian college, so I sort of know that religion is man-made. Was created by man, and there's some elements of true elements of the Bible that I use now to affirm myself as a gay man, or even to affirm individuals, and that has sort of that has that has guided me in how I look at myself. Earlier on, I was helping someone else who had an incident, and I was, a phrase from the Bible that says, "You're beautifully and wonderfully made." We're technically a Christian nation, but to be able to say that and tell someone, "But you're beautifully and wonderfully made. This is who you are made to be, regardless of your sexuality. So what if you're same gender loving? But this is who you are," and that is a beautiful thing. And that has sort of guided me in the work I do and why I do what I want to do, because I strongly believe that we're all beautiful. And if, to use the Christian phrase, we're all made in God's image, who am I to judge someone for being different from who I am?
Yeah.
And it's led me to have reappropriated the word grace. It's led me to offer a lot more grace to people. Sometimes it's difficult,
Mhm.
but I keep on saying these are not words that are uniquely tied to the Christian faith, but grace is a beautiful word. And I'm
Mhm.
beginning to use that a lot more. I believe in servant leadership, in being a practical leader in all that I do. So my Christian background has helped influence it has helped me into becoming the person that I am, and even how my sense of social justice, fairness, equity, it comes from there. But I'm taking bits and pieces from other parts of the world, from other faiths, from other individuals, um, from other experiences of me, of my own other experiences, and from other people, and I'm using that to add into myself.
Yeah. I mean, that brings me to my next question about kind of what animates and inspires your work in LGBTIQ activism and storytelling. Can you talk a little bit more about how you became involved in that kind of work in Kenya? And specifically, as a storyteller, what role you think storytelling has in inspiring change, human rights, human connection? I'd love to hear more about your work and what inspired it.
Forgive me, I get emotional along the way, so I will get
I do too.
teary-eyed
It's
because
okay. We're
the
both coughing,
reason
we're
why
both crying. It's okay.
the reason why I do the work I do, and I landed in activism totally by accident. I'd come back to Kenya from being in the UK where I'd gone to do my master's, and I stayed on for a while. And I came back to Kenya, and it was where I found family, where I found other Kenyans who looked like me. In that time, it was a mishmash of us who are mostly homosexuals and lesbians, gays and lesbians, of one or two bi people, no trans people, but it felt like coming home, to be honest, Hannah, and there was a call to do activities, we need people to do stuff. So I just show up. I just show up. There's a World AIDS Day march. I went and helped paint a banner. I didn't march because I was shit scared. But it was that, then getting involved into conversations on starting a group and writing the constitution and stuff like that. And next thing I found myself attending meetings. And for me, I remember curating an event, cultural evening, and it was a really cool event, and we're able to celebrate this little queer artist or queer work. And that's when I realized this is a thing I enjoy. I'm going to do this on the side. I'm going to continue being a full-time journalist. But along the way, I realized, a friend of mine, we decided we're both gay, we're both working in the media. We're going to use our platforms to try and bring about change. So I was working at the BBC at that time. The World Social Forum was taking place in Kenya, which is a huge global meeting for activists. It was the first time, I think, in East Africa. And we had a tent that we had been given. It was called the G Spot. Yeah, it was a Q Spot. The Q Spot. It's called the Q Spot. And we'd go there. I went there with my microphone and headphones under the guise of covering the event for work. But it was my way of just seeing what was happening at the tent. And there was a young man who'd come from a small town on the like maybe 100 kilometers from Nairobi, the capital. And he said he'd seen the coverage on TV, and he came to Nairobi because he wanted to see people like him, whether this was true. And that has always stayed with me. And I think that is the reason why I do this work, to help people see themselves, to help see them, that to help people know that they're not alone. When I was young, I thought I was the only gay in the village, to use the expression. But I have an opportunity to create spaces, to use my work to show people that queerness being gay or being, being lesbian can exist in my skin, in my African, Kenyan, Black skin. You know, I'm big on representation. I want people to know that they're normal, that they're not alone. There's so many of us who are doing our stuff here in Kenya, across the continent. So for me, that is the reason why I do it, to more queer African representation. I do that through my work. It was really gratifying to be able to do that when I was working at the BBC, coverage of events. If the issues that needed, if people needed a pundit, I would on a particular issues that touch on LGBTQI matters, I would call in colleagues and friends as pundits. So it gave us a platform on there. And even the work I did after that, I curated I co-founded the first LGBTQ film festival here in Kenya, which is actually, I think the 14th edition is going to take place in Kenya. Was introduced into writing. My first book was a collection of stories from LGBTQI Kenyans. Um, and I realized this is my thing. This is my thing, to create spaces, to create platforms, to not create stories, to amplify people's stories. I tell people I'm a custodian of people's stories. And I think that is my work, and I enjoy that, to make sure that people get seen, to make sure that people get heard, to make that sure that our stories are enjoyed by all and sundry, more so by ourselves, but to show people that our queerness is very, very African.
I love that, Kevin. Thank you. I hope you will excuse me from going a little bit off script. I know we had talked about some other questions.
That's absolutely
We have
fine.
so many, and then maybe after we can continue the conversation after this um after this interview. But I'm just thinking, throughout your decades of work, and particularly in your work in journalism and storytelling, what have been your observations about the landscape of LGBTIQ activism in journalism, both in Kenya and internationally? What have you seen change that maybe concerns you? What are things that bring you hope? I'm hearing, the representation undercurrent coming through. But in addition to that, kind of, how are you understanding these trends, both in Kenya and abroad?
You know, I try and really want, if I had the money, I would amplify the changes that are taking place in the global south.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there's a lot within the queer community, there's a lot of stuff happening that we don't celebrate enough. And this is the power of America. We're looking to the West quite a bit, but
Right.
was it yesterday or a few days ago, there was the Kenya Supreme Court allowed intersex individuals in Kenya to be officially recognized and are able to have their markers on the birth certificate. That is a big thing.
Yeah.
That is a big thing.
Hmm.
If someone who's intersex, for the first time, the law recognizes them for who they are, in spite of the environment that is taking place, and I look at the African landscape, where we are now compared to where we were in 2006, when I came into this movement and found my feet, totally different. Just looking at the Kenyan landscapes, there are groups in different parts of the country. It's not just a Nairobi urban thing. There are clinics that have been set up. People are writing books. I'm curating a film festival, and I'm really looking forward to that. And we're having films from across the region. There are a number of films, but there's contribution from Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, to Kenya, South Africa, Namibia. Now we're seeing people create stories on queerness in Africa. So that is happening. People are beginning to say, we want to tell our stories in our way. And that is a good thing. And it's not just here. There's a movie we're getting from India. We're seeing content coming out from the Far East. We're seeing content coming out from South America. So that people are beginning to realize that there isn't one type of queerness globally. Or sexuality is being celebrated in very many ways using localized, contextualized terms. So that is a good thing. You know, when we're questioning, is this the right term to use for our context? What does pride mean for us as Kenyans? What does pride mean for us as Africans? 2 years ago, I was in Botswana for Gaborone Pride. Gaborone is the capital city of Botswana. It was so affirming to see that I can celebrate pride in Africa. It was outside Western Pride, so this was around October, but it was the beginning of Pride season, and they call it African Pride. There was Pride in Botswana, there was Pride in Joburg, Soweto, Cape Town, Bloemfontein, Durban, you know. In Lesotho, they had a Pride March last year. I'm getting shivers around that, you know. Mauritius had what theirs earlier on, but it's just stuff is happening, and people are finding community even online in digital spaces that they're creating for themselves. To be honest, Hannah, I will focus on that. I will focus on the strides that people who 20 years ago were not even seen or were not even heard are now creating spaces for themselves and creating community. A part of me sometimes feel that I'm like, look, here in Kenya, we've just recognized intersex people, and yet we've seen changes in America that almost wants to make trans people invisible. I'm like, it's not just, come on,
Yeah.
we're doing stuff. Positive stuff is happening. Same-sex marriage was recognized in Thailand not too long ago, and we saw that.
Mhm.
It's giving people options. It's giving people hope, you know? And in spite of all this, in spite of the backtracking, this increased homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia that's taking place in the world, we have to defend our wins. We not just only have to defend our wins, we have to celebrate our wins. I have a nephew who transitioned, and when they saw what happened to the election in the States, they really went down. And I was telling their mother, listen, you know, I started sharing images of LGBTQI folk who are getting into Congress, into representative houses, saying, but there are still wins. We may not have, there's still wins taking place. And I think that is important. We need, especially through a time like this where there's a cloud hanging in some
Right.
sections of the world, we have to celebrate our wins. We have to remind ourselves of our wins. We have to remind ourselves that we are on the right side of history, that love does win. Love does win. And at times it takes a while to actually let that sit in, but please know that love does win because we're seeing victories in other parts of the world,
Yes.
in other
Yes.
parts of the world. And maybe that's where our strength will come from.
Yeah. I
You know?
agree and hear that loud and clear. And my next question is a direct follow-up of, I mean, what do you think in this, I'm sitting here as we had a conversation before we started this interview about this particular political moment here in the United States. We're recording this interview for context for listeners in February 2025. Um, what many LGBTQ Americans and Americans more broadly right now are deeply concerned about the growing attacks on our rights here in the United States. And obviously, this has huge ramifications and ripple effects internationally. But what do you think Americans in this moment can learn from Kenyan activists like yourself or other LGBTIQ activists from the global South have fought against authoritarianism and human rights abuses? As you all are leaders in this moment, what can we learn from you? What pieces of advice do you have for us?
We have to defend our wins. We have to defend the positive changes in
Yeah.
legislature that protect us as a community. We have to, the fight doesn't end just because you have a set of laws. Maybe we became complacent and realized we're out of the woods. There will
Mm.
always be people who will not like, or because of self-hate, will not like queer folk. If you look at other areas, we saw the turnaround in Roe versus Wade when the Supreme Court ruled a few years back.
Yeah.
We have to defend whatever wins we have. The work will never end. Let us not cheat ourselves. The work will never end. Even if we do decriminalize in Kenya, we have to change to use the phrase hearts and minds of people. There will still be people on the down low. It won't end. You know, but we have to create spaces of safety. We have to create spaces where people are able to find community. We have to create spaces of comfort. We have to create spaces of joy. We have to protect those spaces constantly. The work we do does not end because we're human beings. And there will always, I'll speak as an African Black person, there are people who have an issue with the color of my skin. There are people who don't believe women should be empowered. That doesn't mean we stop. We hope the work that we do increase advocacy. We rethink how advocacy takes place. Be smart because by God, we are smart. The fact that we have overcome so much internal trauma to get to where we are. I think we forget that I fought so much to love myself. Straight people don't do that. I mean, some people do that in a different way, but I fought so much to love all of me. Fought so much. And I affirm myself every single day and love on myself every single day. The work we do internally still also needs to hit the ground. Let us love on one another, and our love is contagious. I believe our love is contagious. And people one day will come around and realize that love indeed does win. It's going to get harder before it gets better. But you have to stand for the truth that you are. You have to defend who you are. You have to defend if the work continues. The work continues and it doesn't stop. Eve, I'm saying that for us here in Kenya until we get more wins. And it's a question of protecting those wins for ourselves and for future generations. It's a question of protecting wins in we're seeing autocrats come up in different parts of the world and taking that back. The work continues. The work doesn't end. The work of protecting yourselves is continuous. Take heart, but also don't forget about queer joy. Queer joy is our fuel.
It is, yeah. And I'm feeling a lot of queer joy in this conversation too. So I appreciate you sharing everything, and I'm really excited for people to have the opportunity to listen to everything you just said when we get this video out into the world. I want to turn now to, we've been talking about LGBTIQ activism and work and movement building, both in Kenya and then internationally. Something I have found in LGBTIQ spaces is the focus on youth and youth activism, which is so important and so needed. But I think we often forget the realities of older adults in our community. That's something I'm really passionate about. And I want to talk to you about what your experience of aging has been, how it's shaped your identity. Do you think there are unique challenges that come with growing older as a queer person? What are those? Yeah, please share what you feel comfortable with, what resonates.
Thank you. It's really interesting that I'm on this side of it, say, talking as a queer elder. I don't see
Yeah.
myself as an elder,
Okay.
but I
Yeah.
recognize that there will get a time that I don't go out partying as often anymore. I don't really care for it.
Yeah.
Maybe once or twice a month I want to dance, but I really want to make sure I'll dance until 2 o'clock. I'll dance until 2 in the morning, be home by 2:30, and be up at 7 on walking on the beach because I live by the beach on the sea,
Oh,
on the
beautiful.
coast, you
Beautiful.
know. So there are things like that, but I also recognize my body is changing. My body is changing so much. How do I look after my body? Are we creating spaces for people to talk about changes that they're experiencing? Some of my girlfriends are premenopausal and they're talking about that and how their body is changing and the challenges that come with it. You know, we will, and I like, and when I speak about this with younger folk, I keep on saying, don't be ageist. You will not be young forever.
Right.
We thought would be young forever, but really, time moves on and our body moves on, So I think it is important that that whole intergenerational conversation is to be had. We can't do this alone. We can't do this as the elders alone. We have and younger folk, our younger queer folk cannot do it alone. And I found that if we meet at a place where we're able to talk and listen to one another, we'll be able to look out for one another, where we're able to share our stories and our experiences and our journeys and how we overcame this. I wrote my first book it came out in 2014, and people are shocked that 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, I was able to do a book like that in Kenya. I'm like, yeah, but that's why are you so surprised?
Mm.
2014 was a great year to be queer in Kenya, in spite of the laws. But
Mm.
so much was happening. So much, so many beautiful things were happening, you know? So that was really cool. And I keep on saying it is important to remember that and to build our queer history, to build our queer heritage, and to pass on that queer heritage and the knowledge and how we overcame stuff rather to those who are behind us, and lessons learned. I just keep on saying I learn the best way to grow is to learn. When I tell people I try and phrase this, the day I refuse to learn and grow is the day I die.
Yeah.
But and I think it's important to recognize that we will change, we will take up different positions. There's going to be illness, our bodies will feel tired. you know how do we support one another? How do we support loneliness? Has become a thing, but people also want, what kind of spaces are we creating for people who don't want to be in the clubs? What does community look like if you're 55? What does community like when you're 60? What does community like if you're a wheelchair bound or you have limited accessibility? Where does community, and then as a queer person, what happens to your body if you're a trans person and you might feel my hormones are really acting up with me, you know? What do I do with the changes? How do I still be a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, an older, beautiful man? Who's going to look after me? Is there a salon is there a hairdresser? Is there a stylist? It's things like that. We don't stop, but we have to create spaces and opportunities for people to find home, regardless of whatever age you're at. And I think sometimes we forget that people grow older, people are younger, and not to rubbish. I think it's wrong to rubbish young people saying what they're doing. No, I don't think that's right. I was young at one time. I thought I was invincible. I thought I'd live forever,
Mm.
but I've grown older. I think I've grown wiser, but I also recognize there are things that younger folk are doing better than I am.
Mm.
And I can still learn from that. And I
Mhm.
still appreciate how I keep on saying it will give me new eyes. And I think that being open to having new eyes keeps me young, keeps my spirit young.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have observations or experiences, personal relationships with younger or older queer people in your life that come to mind when you're talking about this?
To be honest, I just really get on well with young folk.
Yeah.
I think I'm approachable. Maybe it's this going back to my days in the church as a youth
Mm.
worker. So I've always
Okay.
related really with the folk,
Yeah.
I'm fairly open. Even then, people will come and tell me stuff or just
Mhm.
hang out with me because I don't have that many I don't have that many qualms. I'm like, you just be you, be yourself and love on yourself. It's 19. You're such a cool kid. Really cool. And we got on really well. I'm like, I like this person. And I'm not looking at him as a 19-year-old. I'm like, I like this
That's
person.
awesome.
This
Yeah.
person, yeah, and I looked at him, yes, you're 19, but I'm like, I like this person, but I know you also can give me something, but I just like you. It was good vibes, man.
Yeah.
They give me good
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah.
And I think it was that. And I think we picked that up and that was really nice. And the things I know I do well, and I've done really well because of the experience that comes with age.
Mm.
And the eyes that age has and the eyes that age has given me.
Mm.
I think there's a place for learning.
Yeah.
I think learning, to use an African expression, I think what we need to see more within the community is to sit at each other's feet
Mm.
and learn.
Yeah.
There is age gives you a sense of wisdom and a different way of looking at life. I even now with my older queer friends, I'm like, it's over. I just really admire, especially older queer folk who, especially Kenyan, the ones I've met from Kenya, who stuck to their truth and didn't get married. I'm like, how did you survive?
Right.
You know? And they're like, it was lonely, but they're like, but this is who I am. And I admire people like that when you're doing it on your own with not much community and not, there's no internet, but you knew who you are and you figured, but this is my truth and I will stick to it. I will not bow to pressure and get married or because of societal and cultural norms and stuff like that. I'm still learning, Hannah. I'm still learning from the people older than me. I'm still learning from the people younger than me. I have a cross section of friends from right across. Like those who are like, okay, tell me about Beyonce's new album. I can run to. I'm like, okay, don't get it, don't care for it. But, okay, I like knowing about what's happening, but it gives me the wisdom the choice now to pick and choose what I can
Right,
add into my bouquet of life.
right,
And I
right.
think that's how I'm getting on with it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we're coming to the close of our conversation. Um, I just want to end with this last question of what are your hopes and dreams for the future of LGBTQ rights in Kenya and how do you see, your work, what's next contributing to this vision?
I'm excited. I'm excited for the work that is happening in Kenya, but I'm also excited for two things. The movement is growing, movement is finding its feet and reaching, trying to is it metamorphosize, considering the changing environment. But outside of the movement, there's also community. There's a community of folk right across in like I said earlier on, in different parts of the country, and people are finding themselves, are finding community outside of the movement. We're far from out of the woods, but we have our wins. We're discovering that we have heritage. We have a queer Kenyan heritage. Last year, we wrote a book called We've Been Here, which was a collection of stories from queer Kenyans who are 50 years and older. And people are fascinated by the fact that there were, people found ways to connect. It was at public phone booths, it was at bus stops. There's a lot of cruising and cottaging, and people were able to do that. And folks are really interested in like, oh, and it counters the element of the fact queerness is an African, you know. I just think there's a lot more scope in terms of the work that we can do, considering, especially in the media and communication landscape that I work in. There's a lot more room for creativity. We can imagine even our own queer realities. And I think to anyone who's watching this, who's creative, imagine what Kenya will be like in 2050. And that is possible. It's in another 25 years' time. It is possible. And I strongly believe, especially because of the fact that in the 15, 16 years that I've been involved in activism in Kenya, we've seen so much change. Can't even imagine what's going to happen within the next 10. But it will not come easy, and that's the reality. But I'm not going to focus on that. Not that alone. I'm also going to focus on the good things that are happening and the innovative, creative ways that are being invented of what queerness looks like. Once upon a time, we didn't think that we as queer folk were going to have kids or had, we thought we didn't deserve to have children, but I've had conversations with people who are considering parenting and becoming parents in an environment that is good for them. They protects their individuality. They are who they are, and it also protects their child. And they want to become great fathers and mothers. And these are queer folk. Back then, we didn't have that conversation. We thought, oh, now we're gay, we are not going to have kids. But people are talking about parenthood. That is positive. And how what parenthood looks like. You know, I'm just really glad that my nephews can see me in my authentic self. They can say Uncle Kevin's openly gay, and that just shows that it is okay. And I navigate spaces within my family as I am. Just sad that if they have any younger nephews or nieces, they can see themselves. They don't have to be gay, that they can see themselves. They can they can be themselves. They can be their true selves. So I'm really excited that they're slowly but surely an increasing crop of queer folks who are also growing older, who are also proud of who they are, who are also showing that, man, we're still here until our time comes, and we're still here in our fullness, in our finery, in our queerness. So I'm really excited for that. And that is something that not just for Kenya, but for across the continent. Our community is growing. It's not easy. But but there are wins, like I said, there are wins and there are opportunities we're creating for ourselves to make sure that we are no longer invisible. But also sometimes our invisibility works to our advantage. We can
Yeah.
navigate spaces in ways that people didn't manage. Our invisibility sometimes is also our superpower.
Hmm.
And I think that is something we need to capitalize on as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm hopeful. I am a glass full person. I bet you picked that up. So I'm hopeful. There will be setbacks, but yes, there will be wins. There will be wins. Total and a number of wins.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I think we will end there. I'm appreciative of your time. So excited for folks to have the opportunity to listen to this. You mentioned a number of books, resources, both your scholarship and other folks that we'll link out to in the descriptor of this video. And so please explore those. And we'll also link out to your socials, Kevin. So thank you so much. And we will end here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And
It's
thank you
been
for
a
the work
pleasure.
that you have been able to do.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.